teamed coordinator of ActionAid in Brazil and general manager of person, but will be part or are part of the project, especially because if we want to have an anti-racist education, we need everyone to help. This is not a task of a simple group or a simple person. This is our duty, our obligation and responsibility as Brazilians, and we need to invite all of you to participate and contribute to this action that is starting now. Seta project, if you don't know, it starts by Fundo Ela for Equity. This is an international fund that helped us in this first stage to create this project that will finish and will start as of March. If the project is contemplated, we'll have an 8-year project with the Kellogg Foundation, in which we'll work with different partners in the territories, with secretaries of education, funds, institutions for an anti-racist educational system. And let's remember that we are here representing our organizations, and we know that it comes from a long way. We are giving continuity here, and we are inviting you all for this discussion on anti-racist education. So thank you all for your presence. We'll have the opportunity to talk for longer. Thank you, Midian. Thank you, Ana. Perfect. And we also have our partner in this meeting,
Recording in progress.
That is a researcher in the Federal Rural University of Rio. Welcome, Andrei. Please, the floor is yours. First of all, good morning. As it was said, I am Andrei Correia Ferreira. I am a professor at the Federal Rural University of Rio. First, I would like to thank a lot for the invitation and the possibility of being here sharing with you some reflections and exchange of experience on this topic that is so important to the Brazilian society and also internationally. That is the problematization and deconstruction of discriminatory practices, mainly the racist ones, that are deeply within the Brazilian education. And I consider that institutions have a strategic role in the articulation of this deconstruction process, considering that we still have a society that is anchored in a series of narratives and discourses that are deeply discriminative, whether on terms of racism, gender, religions, nation, class. So the institutions that have a plural constitution, as the university, that is a place where it is still possible to produce and spread some kind of critical narration, they are mandatory in carrying out this kind of project and initiative that we consider here. You have to remember that Brazil is a quite complex country with a very complex teaching system, with a vast majority of private institutions working for the most paradoxical logics, regardless of any kind of value judgment. We have the public institutions that are deeply in a deep hierarchy according to their institutions, if they are federal, state, or municipal, in terms of state, money, and so on. And it's also ethnicity hierarchy with many filters in terms of social education in the institutions. And most of the Brazilian population has no access to the institutions of higher status. So racism is deeply impregnated in these institutions. And it's very important for us to be able to take the initiative of have this criticism and deconstruct it simultaneously, deconstructing the sense of dismounting the racist practice, and in the sense of developing an autonomous educational process to go against this perspective. So first, this is what I would like to say to start, and I thank you all once again. Thank you, Andre. Now let's remember that this afternoon and tomorrow morning, we'll have a course offered in partnership, and this is a research group on the perspective of the anti-racist education related to inclusion, youth, and gender. So making use of this opportunity, I'll now pass on the floor to Tania from Geladesk. Tania, last year, Geladesk created a survey on the impact of the pandemic in the school life of young girls and young adults. And it proves us that it's necessary to treat this topic in a more effective way. To you, how Seta project can contribute to the creation of a school space to gather this, welcome this reality and transform it? Well, the results of the survey showed a deep inequality. Some figures leave no margin for doubts, because over the centuries, Black women and girls are always vulnerable when this is more severe and quite explicit in simple things like access to school material, and almost 88% or more than 90% of white girls had access to school material, but Black girls had only 58% of access. In complying with the school tasks, this number was very low for Black girls due to the commitment of the times of study, so that they are taking care of their household tasks and family and so on. So families also had access to online content only via their mobiles, and the mobiles were divided among other family members if they had a mobile. And the internet providers were very poor in terms of connection to them. But on the other hand, white families in the same region had access to this content via computers, and they could access the content in a printed way, and they could easily go to school to have that. And these girls also were in a more exposed situation in terms of domestic violence and sexual abuse. It was quite deep in this pandemic time. So I believe that an action as this one that Seta is working and trying to accomplish will take to the curriculums these points as well. There are points that are not seen, although we have a lot of landmarks that are not complied, and I believe this action will help promoting the strengthening of these landmarks, and also thinking about new measures so that these and other necessary measures are reached. Thank you, Tania. I would like to make use of your speech to bring this perspective of what is school dropout. And then I pass on the floor to Adriana. And I would like to know, Adriana, youngsters drop out or are expelled from the space? Well, this is a main point for the education of the Black population in Brazil, because since the beginning of the educational system in Brazil, the Black population was excluded. when the educational system in Brazil was planned and thought, it was as a public policy and educational system that excluded the Black population. It was thought and planned as a system to organize eugenically so that the Black boy studying here downtown for some reason in Rio, so that they couldn't study anymore. So there were many reasons for this kind of population not going to the public school when it was authorized. So in their foundation, the public system in Brazil is organized so that the Black population is excluded. After that, you have an important landmark that is the repair of the educational system in Brazil and the basic education. That is Law 10639. That is an organized landmark that is organized by the organizations of the Black movement. It's important, but it's a landmark as it is organized as a legislation. But after this organization, we need to consider the disputes in the states, municipalities from the conceptual point of view, and in terms of budget and the training of teachers and professors for their classrooms, and to spread the understanding of what the life of the Black student means in the classroom in such a way that we can have a whole positive story of the Black kid, this Black boy or Black girl in school, so that they are not excluded, because this dropout, this high dropout that we have compared proportionally between Black and white kids in the national educational system, it is built because if Brazil is organized by racial domination, Black racial domination, school participate in this domination. And if Seta is there, is to oppose to this racial domination system. We created a plural and diverse school. Wonderful, right? Incredible. So thank you, Adriana. And talking about diversity and this plurality, we also talk about representativity. And then, Tom, I pass on to you in this sense. When we talk about youth, we know that we have quilombolas and ribeirinhas and so on, but today the curriculum for quilombola education are a priority when we think about education in Brazil. But how is it in practice? What are the challenges? Could you talk about it to us? Yes, good morning. In fact, Brazil has a problem in terms of legislation, and we have today LDBI obliging the teaching of Afro culture and indigenous culture, but we need to create strategies like this one, the Seta movement, so that it reaches the other end. I mean, it reaches our kids and adolescents. And CONAC also has some strategies in terms of searching for this education so that it reaches their target audience, and that we can minimize these impacts that historically have been caused negatively and are negative to the population. So the guidelines are celebrating 10 years, the curricular guidelines for quilombola education, they are celebrating 10 years, as well as Law 10639, but it's only on paper. It doesn't matter the strategies and trying to search for methods to reach and be complied to the audience, but we still have a lot to do. So probably this partnership or this relation of these groups along with the Seta project, probably this is the kickoff or probably a second chance, let's say, for us to try and have anti-racist education in Brazil working, in fact. Wonderful, that's perfect. And also in this perspective of youth, as we are here with Jefferson from peripheral connection and talking about diversity, I would like to make a question to you, Jefferson. We cannot think about education without thinking about mobility and city occupation, representativity, and also the perspective of violence. I mean, urban violence and state violence via the police violence. We have to talk about it, but how do you see the impact of all this in the daily life of the youngsters, and how school can dialogue with the different ways of representativity and bring this debate on these topics to youth?
Good afternoon, good morning, I'm sorry, thank you for the invitation. So, Minja, I think that it has to do with everything. Education is not a field separated of the rest of our lives. Actually, it's a sector that it make it possible for us to understand everything as they are coming, as they are happening. And I think that anti-racist education, it's not acceptable uh, in the model that we have today. So we have to stop everything that's happening now and look of what it's working as an educational model in different places. So if, for example, if you go to Pernambuco, what is the base of education, it's different from what it works for Mangueirinha, that is a favela here in the city of Caxias. Tom was talking through the point of view of Konaki and the perspective of the Quilombola educational would make more sense to Mangueirinha than a school from Europe. So I think it goes through modifying. It's not only talking about the racial issues, but we have to understand that it has to do with something from the past. That is why Seta should be a long-term program, because it's not only about management, it's not about politics, it's public policy. We need to think that this reflection needs to get to everyone, that education it happens in different ways. It goes through religious culture, it happens in different ways, and public safety is not separated from that. So if we look at the number of classes that are stopped due to gunshots and the lack of mobility, I'm going to tell my experience. I live in Caxias, and I had a scholarship in PUC. And every day I would spend 5 hours of my day to go from my house to the school to the university. And there's an education idea as is only inside the classroom, but it has to do with the transport, with the food, with the living. It has to do with everything that is not, we are not thinking. So we have to think about the citizenship in a logic that it's against the racism, but it needs to be integrated with everything. So to start, I think it's a little bit of this. I'm not sure how is this the dynamic of the rest of this meeting, but I would like to get the attention that we are mobilizing ourselves and searching for coalitions. This year we celebrate 10 years of the quota policy, and we have the racial quota that are being attacked. They're under attack due to people don't know it, people don't understand it, and some people's hate due to our presence in the universities. And it's important for us to celebrate this. We cannot forget, we need to celebrate this conquer, and it's a Black movement conquer, and we need to share these stories, because this is part of anti-racist education. There's no basic education without the high school, without the university. Everything needs to be integrated in society. It needs to keep going for our own survival. And finalizing, then I can bring the exact data. But if you get the song from Racionais, the Primo Preto opens this talking about the police approach, about thefts, and he gives all the data. And one of the data that he says in 1997, It only 2% of the university students are Black. This changes from 1997 to now, and this changed due to the Black movement and to the quota that we have. If the other data are still failing, if we're still being murdered, is because something is not integrated to education. So it's not only getting in, but we need to implement other policies. So it's important for us to use everything we have, all the arguments we have, to use this quota until we don't need them anymore. Thank you. Thank you, Jefferson. 19 years. So to guarantee the access and the effectiveness that we already have. And we have a great big challenge. And talking about challenges, I like to talk about this challenge in this indigenous education, because what is indigenous education, what is indigenous school, because there's differences. And even though it's a legislation, it's still something to be implemented as the law 10639 that Adriana brought. So the federal constitution of 1988 assured that the indigenous population had the right for this education in articles 232 and 234. And we know that in practice, this is very different. So, Socorro, to you, what's the biggest challenge that we have? How are we going to fight this and find solutions? Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Talking about education for us, the indigenous people, as for the Black people in Quilombola, it's a challenge to talk about these policies that are already written here, but they are not being contemplated for the population, especially in the base part. So we have the education from the base, and also that the one that comes from the municipality for those who are in this society. There's this difference. So I would like to talk about something very important when we talk about this anti-racist education. For most population, this anti-racist word, they don't know it. It's as if we talk about feminism, it's still a taboo for many indigenous population, different from us that is already inserted in this educational context, that we're able to be here in this education, and we are breaking this paradigm and taking this to community, especially to our women, because as women, we have this challenge to face our own leaderships, to be able to get this knowledge inside the community. The fact that we are women today is starting this education, raising this education flag, we are suffering with this, because to break this concept that it's already accepted by society, especially by the leadership, it's hard. And talk about education, the basic education, as our colleague said, without basic education, we don't have anything. When we accept the Seta proposal, we thought what we would face inside our communities. We have 62 municipalities in the Amazon. How we would take this knowledge, this training for those who are going to work in educating our kids, especially when we are talking about second languages, because not all the teachers are trained to work with this. I know a community that work with second language. They speak their native language and they teach Portuguese as a second language. So it is hard because we have a lot of different groups. How we work this in the municipality of São Gabriel, because we have different languages. How we are going to choose how to choose only one language so we can teach them. This is a challenge. So for those, we need teachers, we need capable teachers, trained teachers to work with this. We have a lot of indigenous teachers, but not all of them are qualified to take this knowledge inside the community. This is one of the biggest challenges, because when we were building this document, we were talking about this. What's the profile of this educator? Not only in the indigenous issues, but to talk about Black people, that about the kids that are in the favelas, that are in the communities, that are the minority, because no one is taking this into consideration. The education today, I see that people are not paying attention. If I compare where I live to Rio, it would be like a slum. So I see this because my kids are there in the primary education, and I see how hard it is for them. I see the teachers, how those teachers are going to teach them, and also the prejudice saying that if they say they're indigenous, they suffer this prejudice because it seems that it seems this doesn't exist. Many times my kids say that he is indigenous and say, no, you're not. And so they want to erase our our race. They want to erase our ethnic. So those are the challenges that we would have to face with you, and those are the challenges that are coming.
Muito obrigada, Socorro.
Thank you, Socorro.
Nossa, e são desafios que a gente nem
And
imagina.
those are challenges that we do not imagine that are basic, that it's your right, it's a kid's right. So it's important what you bring here. I want to use your speech and pass the floor to Alexandro about the educational funding and investments. What's the investment in an interracial education that we have here in Brazil, and what do we evaluate that it's still necessary? We still need to improve these investments. As any other issues that are surrounding the Brazilian state, funding this this Brazilian education goes through the structural racism. So when we see how those resources are distributed, we see that receive less investments. So they have more infrastructure problems, they have more students per class, they have less textbooks to develop their works, because this budget distribution goes through this racism. When Socorro says, for example, about this indigenous education, for them to work, we need to invest. We need to invest in the indigenous teachers training. We need to build
there in the municipal and state planning, and we need, in fact, to have a committed population so that they understand that racism is not a problem of the Black population, but it's necessary to see the whole educational system to deal with these challenges. So the discussion on the indicators is also important to re-guide the financial policy, as Alex mentioned here. Thank you, Denise. And it also goes through this logic of cognitive participation, which is important so that we can think about this education participation. So we need to talk about political participation and we youth, but we have to talk about the students' unions. And I'm thinking about the national campaign for the rights of education and how this topic of anti-racism is being discussed now in the students' unions. So good morning, everyone. I think that Denise's point is the link to my speech, because Denise brought something that is very important, that for education to be transformed, we need participation. This is an aspect that the campaign believes a lot. We believe since the foundation, and this is how it works as a network that is all over the country, and understand that this process is also political. So we need to have a strong basis to influence this process. So we need to have everyone understanding what it is. So we always say that, and Midia is also from communication, she knows that this is very important because many people break this bubble, and how we talk to that to people that are not converted, and how we talk to the students. This is the big question of the campaign. As we were thinking that before, we had this point, and when Seta enters, we think that, wow, now is the time for us to strengthen that even more. And the project starts with the states that are the ones with the indigenous population and also with the quilombola population. And we have all this problem that is far away from us, like Amazonas, Amapá, and Maranhão, the states being selected to start this research. And this research that we are developing starts as a diagnosis research. So with the students, we want to know what are the participation models that we have. And union, student union, is a term that is in the legislation and probably stays there in 1996. If you ask about a student union today, I don't know if they even know what we're talking. So we have many different terms to discuss about that, like participation, collective groups, and so on. And then we had workshops with the students last year in this March to know how to reach the biggest number of students in these three states. That is where we are starting to think about anti-racist education and to think about education in an inclusion way. Inclusive in the sense of having quilombola and indigenous population and traditional populations, all these peoples. And thinking about this context that is a very complex one, and you presented here, and Socorro mentioned that, and Amazonas is the most difficult state in this sense to us because we don't know this reality. We have no idea how to organize education in the state of Amazons, and the classrooms and the distribution, because they have classrooms, but they don't have schools. And as you said, bilingual education. So there are many challenges, and we developed a tool that is an online one, that is a chat bot aimed at having the students there, because they indicated that to us. We asked, how can we reach the highest number of students possible? And they said, well, if there was something via WhatsApp, because WhatsApp not always is consuming their data. I mean, if they have a prepaid plan or if the internet doesn't work very well. So we are developing this tool, but we couldn't set the language, the tone of language to reach the students. So all that is to say that participation is very important, and it's important because it produces a mobilization that will keep being there, because we want to know the beginning of this process, this start along with Seta. Because the first point is to diagnose. We have the students' unions, we have public policies and the secretaries to stimulate the students' unions. We had two big surprises in Amapá and Maranhão, because in Maranhão, even there is a youth secretary to promote this participation. So they have this whole process of elections and creating the unions, and we don't even know that it existed. And in Amapá, there is a management of student mobilization. And Amazon is the state that we didn't find a group like this. I mean, like a board of indigenous education. It is there. We are starting to create a relation in the sense, but this is a state that we didn't see a strong mobilization. So the next step, thinking about SETA, is how we keep up with that. We find the unions, we understand that they are there or not, we understand if there is or not a public policy, and based on that, we think about it as a way of keeping this political participation, because being part of the union is stimulating the students to understand what is educational public policy and anti-racist education, and teach them, I mean, making them understand and participate actively to understand how they can also, as subjects of the process, they can demand the public policies to be implemented. So our part in this research is that. Okay, thank you very much, Marceli. It's a challenge to have this direct dialogue with the students, because it's important to hear. The hearing process is a process that we learn. As we said, we don't teach anything, we learn. And talking about the youth as well, I would like to make use of Raul Santiago, who just arrived here and is also part of our consultancy board. So how you arrive, and now you have a question to answer. And if you want the real changes, what is the role of the youngsters in this process? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry for being late. And I think the main role is that youth is living, they are building the solutions. And we need to invert the question in the sense, I mean, what this youth teaches us, especially the Black and peripheral youth in this scenario is building their own solutions. Many times they are abandoned in the structure of the public power to progress and build the solutions in these inequality scenarios. Coming here, I was thinking about this discussion we are having today, and I thought that only in Complexo do Alemão and Peia, we had many shootings this year, and we have more than 10 days, I mean, not following days, but more than 10 days with the schools closed and students, children exposed to that reality of not reaching a school due to the shooting or having to leave early because the shooting was around the school. So in the end, the projects, I mean, they create the mother groups and students groups to share discussions and information and building their own solutions. So we need to think what this youth can teach us in this sense, because they create the solutions, wondering the reality is violent. So we have inserted this routine in their daily lives. I mean, they have this racist violence in the core of this reality, mainly when we're talking about the peripheral kids. So we need to strengthen them. We need to provoke the public power, how to change this, and how it's possible that in 2022 we are facing this reality. Things that we should be in the past is our reality, like schools closing because of a police operation and shooting and violence in the surroundings of that space, or the painful scene that we see the young kids all laying down on the school floor due to this confrontation. I would like not to see that anymore. I wish I couldn't see it this year, but we are seeing this year. So we need to do everything to value this youth that is the core of this structure and are the ones that are forced to understand the reality of racism in the country, also based on the reality of education, when they can't study or circulate, or they can't have their plans. And just to finish, we have recent data from the Center of Studies of Safety and Citizenship called Shooting the Future, that literally studies the year 2019, the city of Rio, and the impacts of the police operations. And 75% of municipal schools and public schools had problems, had confrontations and shootings in their surroundings. And we have numbers showing that 64% of Portuguese language learning is completely not happening. And when we assess mathematics, for example, the whole school year is lost. In terms of number, we have important numbers showing that about 25,000 reais are not being part of this person that could be like in terms of transportation or food or anyone. So hearing this youth and strengthening them will make them avoid being the target of this racist violence in our country. I think that's a little bit of that for the debate. And I'm sorry again for being late, but I would like to say that I was starting work in Macaé and I took some time to be here. Anyway, good morning.
Chegou no tempo certo, tá tudo entre a gente. Tudo
Thank you,
certo.
thank you.
Bem, né? Gente, que time, né? Não tem como esse
Well,
projeto dar errado com essas pessoas.
we think that with this team, there's no way that this project will go wrong. And also with the consultants, we have the connection, Alexandro, and we have an amazing group of people that I'm going to present to you. I'm going to say their names today. We are launching our advisory board, people that help us to think about our strategies and everything. So the names are Lima Gomes, Zélia Amador, Vilma Reis, Giovanni Harvey, Luciano Viegas, Aniele Franco, Nelze Lizarazo, Delar, that it's from a common institute, Venor Munhoz, that it's from UN. So we have a dream team because we have this dream, we are dreaming big. And inside these dreams, I have another question here to you. It's for everybody. Very fast, if you can answer. It's a $1 million question. But if you want to answer that, what are the biggest challenges in your point of view so that the society can reach a public educational system that it's anti-racist? So I think that we can start here. Oh, feel free to answer if you want.
Para mim,
well, in my humble opinion, to talk about this anti-racist education, for me, the first step it starts inside our own houses. To start speaking with our kids and our teenagers to be part of this movement. And then we can ask, ask so these public policies to be implemented, because we have legislations, but what's the reach of this legislation and how far can we go? Because as my own experience talking about education for my kids as an indigenous, as a woman, for them to be part of this movement, I always told we are indigenous, we have to fight for our rights, because there's a huge difference between those people. There's difference between my life, my society, for those who are inside the community. I came from a community that was next to the river. I live at the city of Manaus. I was able to graduate, but my people is still there, and I want to get to them. If today I have this place of speech as a woman, as a Indigenous Women Network coordinator at the state of Amazonas, this is our fight. We have to take this anti-racist education for our base, for our community, our kids. Not only education, but health. We say that without education, we don't have health. There are two crucial points for us as indigenous. So I keep saying for women who are part of this, if we don't start speaking with our kids, with our teenagers, who will carry our movement? Because this didn't start with us, for us indigenous and for Black people. And if we don't start inserting in our kids to speak, if we don't, they don't have this desire to add to the movement, to be part of the movement, do you think that everything that we have, that we are doing here, it's not going to long last? So we need to bring this kid since the young age through their teenage. We will gain, and we can ask them, and we get to know each other, and we need to ask the government, we need to ask all of them to be part of this. It's not easy, but we are here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Look at this collective that got together to work with this anti-racist education. This is my answer. Thank you, Socorro. Yeah, she said that my people is still there, and I remember a song from João do Vale, that it's a poet from Maranhão, that it's called My Story. Basically, he said that when he was a kid, he would sell lollipops and candies, and he would envy his kids going to school and go in and studying. And there's a part that he says, well, I envy Zezinho telling that the teacher was angry with me because I didn't want to study. Nowadays, they are all doctors, and I still know one. But those who are born poor will keep being poor. But just seeing my friends as doctors, it makes me feel happy. And all of them are happy, and they are great, and say, João was my colleague, and I'm pretty happy. But it's not about me. It's about Mané, Pedro, and Romão that were also my colleagues and are still there in poverty. They couldn't study, and they don't know how to do things. So I just want to share this because it don't answer you to your question, but it answers.
Obrigada, Jefferson. Denise.
Thank you, Jefferson. Denise.
Muita história, muita emoção.
Well, a lot of stories, a lot of challenges, great challenges. We have this biggest challenge that is to be able to face this conservative phenomenon that it's in society, because we had a lot of setbacks. We couldn't advance, and we are moving forward less and less. So we have a lot of challenges to our project, our initiative here, to be able to react and fight and get together to face this conservative, this racist, this genocide that is happening today in the Brazilian society, in the Brazilian government. This is a fundamental part to pass this. The other point that I want to say as a challenge is the have this active movement of this white population in fighting racism. So white population talking about the educator, the networks, the educational managers, the managers, they need to face that. We need to centralize this racist fight. We only advance in this quality education if this challenge comes to the center of the subject. And I think that this is very important. And I would like to say that it's challenges Another challenge, it's Tanya was talking about this, Socorro was talking about this, many people talked about this. We have a lot of great conquerors with the Black movement, indigenous movement, educational movement, but we're still suffering because they are not being institutionalized in the teaching, in the educational system. So society didn't embrace it, still only debating this racist fight. So I think that this is one of our challenges. Thank you. Thank you, Denise. I think that we have a lot to do. We still have a lot to do. But as from CONAC, we have been working in 3 different fronts. That's resistance, union, and training. So these 3 fronts. So resistance, because if we think about creating strategies nowadays, but we Black men and women in Brazil, how long are we creating strategies to stop racism? More than 500 years. And it's not going to work tomorrow that we'll be able to do that. So we need to resist. We need to resist. We need to unify ourselves. And I think that Seta role today doing this union, promoting this union, promoting this, well, bringing together different sectors and demands and people from different sectors and different associations in the same cause, and we will be able to do that. And also set a role that, in our point of view, our strategy is to do the training for ourselves. So I have young kids, and I can see that what is getting their attention is not what caught my attention, or what still caught my attention today. What is getting their attention is something different. It's a technology that is completely different. So with this training, we need to pass on, we need to understand this youth, we need to understand what these kids, what it's getting their attention, so we are able to bring them to this anti-racist movement. In these strategies is what it's understanding what they want to be able to train them. And with this, we are able to amplify the number of people that know this anti-racist education, or at least they know what it is, an anti-racist education, so we can advance from that. Thank you, Tom. Alexandro has his hand up, so I'll pass him the floor. Yes, I wanted to contribute with 2 aspects that I think that are important in our agenda. The first aspect is for us to decolonize this public policies construction process. The Black population, indigenous population in Colombola, we need to be in the decision-making spaces. We cannot have these anti-racist policies without us being there, without us being at these decision-making spaces. It doesn't mean that we will not recognize the role of white people in this fight, but we cannot have the anti-racist education for the Black people. We need to do with them. We cannot do the indigenous education to the indigenous population. We need to do with them because we know what are the issues we face in the educational systems. And we can conclude, we can help with our knowledge. Brazil, it's working with the Black population, the indigenous population, the quilombolas. We cannot forget of what Aurelino Gomes told us. The Black social movements are the educators of society, even though society is not listening to them. So our part, for me, it's important. The second thing that I would like to say, the anti-racist education, it needs to be included in an idea of the intersectionality. So what it's blocking the right to education of Black indigenous people in Brazil is not only education. What it's blocking them, because we don't have where to live, we don't have access to the revenue, we have this social vulnerability. So this anti-racist education, it needs to be by definition intersectorial. We need to call all of the government sectors to fight this gigantic monster that is the racism in education.
Obrigado, Alexandra.
Great, thank you, Alexandra.
Mais alguém responder sobre os
Anyone
desafios?
else going to answer about these challenges?
Complementando algumas falas aí,
Well, I have some speeches. I believe that we have 2 points that we need to take into consideration in all those reflections. First, because education is a field that can transform, or it can spread this race and class and power. So we live in this permanent alert state to be able to fight these things. So I think that Seta project is about this. It's talking about this. And other thing is another point that I believe that it's a challenge that we have to face is this erasing culture. Alexandra was talking about this, and this is about producing knowledge. This is about the technology and heritage. These are experiences and ways to do here, and we are still living for more than 500 years in this erasing state. I think that we are living, we live in the last years, we lived this. It was the erase of these public policies that we were getting. So I see that we have 500 years to recover it. Thank you, Tanya. And already going to the last points, I would like to say if there's someone else. And I have one more question to Alexandra and Raul. I was listening and thinking about these challenges. I think that everything that was brought here is very important, but thinking about this aspect that I brought with this participation, I was thinking that this is $1 million question, as you said, Midja, $20 million. That is what we are trying. And because we lived, recently we have this, everything we are living in this politics is very recent if we think about it, in what it was this past that is not so far away. And in this way, we have all these legislations that were approved. They are there, they are legislations. And we have another question that is the question that I think that those who work with policies always think about.
And it's also the $1 million question for many years. How can we make public policies become real? How they can be implemented? How does the law stops being simply a law and impacts, in fact, people? So I think that somehow each one of you, based on your speeches and how you experience, you live that, you try to understand this process. And how do you think that in a Brazil that is the Brazil of today, of the present, we need to be very much aware of that. We are not talking about education and public security, or education and territories, and education and people, and education and populations, culture, and so on, in a separated way from the context, and in which people believe that things have to be different from that. So this is a very complex moment we are living, a very difficult one. And there is another aspect that Alexander will discuss and follow this narrative, and many of us also work on that, that is where money comes from to do that. Because if we don't have the resources to implement the public policies, if we have no budget, no funding, we cannot work. So we have many challenges. We need to think about gender, belonging, and also basic things like He said there is the intersectorial issue like health and social assistance, and thinking about the context of Rio and the Brazilian favelas, we need basic sanitation. We have no water. Schools closed due to shooting, but they closed due to water also, and it's all over the country. So this is a very difficult topic, a very complex one. And I think that somehow the challenge is how we can make it be real, how we make all the laws approved so far, that gives the basis to our start pointing. Because I mean, we have the quota law, we have Fundeb, we have many different laws. And how can we make these laws be in fact the basis for where we start? Because we don't need to fight for them, but they are already there. So we need to have a school, in fact, being impacted by these policies. And somehow what we are doing that is gathering to demand to say, hey, we struggled, we have the law, now we want you to comply with it, and we want money for that. Otherwise, we can't do anything. And I think it's very difficult. And we also have important points like resisting, gathering, and being trained to do that. And this is the proposal of this potent process that we believe so much. Well, thank you very much, Marceli. And now going to the end and also talking about the importance of this moment and the symbols that we have here, I have Jefferson, Raul, Alexander, and I pass on to them to ask about the importance of having a consultancy board with these people that are in the front line and understanding this plural education and dialoguing with other areas and all the specificities and the importance of anti-racist education discussion. Want to be the first, Alexander or Raul? Okay, I go on. I'll be brief because I've already spoken too much. I think the importance of this plural consultancy board, and I'm very honored to be part of it, is because of what Denise mentioned. Facing structural racism is a huge task. It's a transhistorical task. It hasn't started now and it won't finish here. So we need to have a social alliance in the most plural way possible, with everyone wanting to face racism, so that we are strong enough to convince the Brazilian society of the damage that racism has to our daily life, and so that we can convince the Brazilian society that whenever we have structural racism, as we have in the Brazilian society, we won't have democracy or full citizenship or a project of sustainable country with this standard of structural racism. So that for us to face that and convince the Brazilian society that this is an urge, this is the priority in the country, a consultancy board dialogue in different fields of society is a mandatory strategy. And I'm pretty happy to be part of this board. I'm very proud of this moment, but I also know the responsibility I have to integrate initiative like this one. So thank you very much, Midian, and you all hearing us and participating at this event. And I would like to share my happiness. I'm pretty happy to be part of this board. Thank you. How? Well, I'll link that to the previous question because they are related. I would making some notes as he was speaking. And my point is we need to think about the chaos because we have a lot of setbacks happening. We have a genocide government, but we have progressions among us because our survival is a continuous resistance. We are the result of that. Our generate is the historical result that despite all that, we are there multiplying. And I say that because I think a lot about the favelas. And when we talk about the Rio favelas, I'm talking about a favela that is also a quilombo, a village that gathers the north and northeast region. So we need to think about the many educations existing in these spaces. Because today we are facing an education that that I see to my children that I had and that don't want anymore, that is surviving racism, so that we can reach the idea of anti-racist education in the society as a whole. And this education to survive racism is having to explain a 5-year-old kid what to do when there is a shooting in the favela, if they are at home on the streets, or what to do, and the 12-year-old as well, how to think about the approaches and the routines, and where to go to enter or leave the slam in case of escape, or to be in that space. But at the same time, this knowledge is the knowledge of historical existence of people surviving and multiplying and saying, well, this generation is now responsible to progress on that, building solutions. So these are the demands. And I like to think about favelas as villages, as quilombo, and now going deeper on that. I had many positive experience on mingling knowledges like the university knowledge and the peripheral one, and the social projects in the periphery, and the creations like Seta were the best experience of education that I had, like common education, thinking about anti-racist and practicing that, because we could mingle the different knowledges, not ignoring any of them. And it's very important. And Brazil doesn't value that. I mean, this organic knowledge of people who are there and who understand much more of the society than those ones that are studying a lot. So mingling these knowledges is important to have an anti-racist education, because it's also inclusion of the knowledge and voices that not necessarily were in the university. And now trying to pass on the floor to you, we're also part of having the reverse process. We are thinking about the South and Southeast, but when we talk in terms of Brazil, but favelas is North and Northeast. So there is a part of the Southeast that needs to do that, because we need to go the way, walk backwards. We need to learn from the North and Northeast and resignify Brazil and resignify the country. So I think it's an important point to work on anti-racist education, and seeing that we need to understand the masks, and this is a summary of Brazil. And just to finish, I think that is strengthening the spaces like this. If you're following us, the Seta project on Instagram, you have to follow. And I said that because the dispute of narratives is important with diverse languages and rap and poetry and culture, and disputing branquitude and the university knowledge. It's not only for quilombolas or indigenous or Black people. It's a discussion of Brazil and people that need to nationalize that and call everyone. And thinking about this structure, I have never gone to the university school, but disputing the narrative is important. So if people ask, what do you study? I said, I study streetology and peripheral sciences, specialized in peripheries of Brazil. So that's it. Anti-racist education is also strengthening these voices and hearing mainly those that are there, connecting and strengthening. That is also helping Seta to reach the goal. So let's multiply and call everyone to go on.
I think that's it, and we have to keep together. Thank you, Raul. Perfect. I think that's it. Those are the paths that it's possible. Thank you for being this perspective. Without memory and recognize the past, we cannot move on. Our philosophy is this, to giving up, and it's amazing. Your speak was amazing. Remembering, I'm going to pass to Ana so we can finish, but we have a course this afternoon, the youth perspective. We have Tux and Perifcomércio, we have Adriana. And today to talk about youth. Tomorrow we will talk about anti-racist education, gender, the inclusion we have different people here, and also education. So please follow in the ActionAid YouTube Brazil. Please follow Seta, our website, it's already working. Seta Projeto, seta.org.br, no, the only .org. And that's it, thank you. I would like to remember that this is action in partnership with the research group with the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, these courses. So please follow up. Now, Ana Paula, please. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you. I'm not going to do, I have two, I will honor two people. This week, we completed 4 years of the brutal murder of Marielle. She is the one that we are honoring today here in this event. Marielle presente, Anderson presente. And the second is Zuildo Loreto Trindade. And she's everywhere. I'm her seed, Sandra, and all of us. She's our master.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.